We're reminded in our daily lives about climate change, created in the main through overconsumption, emissions and non-biodegradable waste, unequivocally caused by human modern-day activities. The UN recently issued a red alert for climate change. No one is exempt from it, and we all need to start making changes from the current path, living with nature and restoring the balance, not destroying it. Maybe by taking a step back before we move forward, we can find a solution. Why wool matters. We've been cultivating land and domesticating animals, including sheep, since around 9000 BC, when wool provided us with our first woven clothing. There's evidence and records of knotted rug furnishings and rudimentary garments dating back to around 5000 BC in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates. In 1907, the first plastic was invented, and in 1935, nylon was introduced by DuPont in Wilmington, Delaware, USA.
By a miracle of modern science, such commonplace things as coal, water, and air have been transformed into threads more elastic than silk.
Stockings of a fine, silky cloth, made by the science of chemistry from a lump of coal.
Although mostly for economic and practical reasons, plastic, which is currently overwhelming the planet, was originally created as a solution to maintain the availability of natural resources on Earth. How wrong that's proved to be, with plastic's devastating effect on marine life first observed in the late 1970s, to the shock and surprise of many, including the Prince of Wales.
There are 55 million of us on this island, using non-returnable bottles and indestructible plastic containers. It is not difficult to imagine the mountains of refuse that we shall have to deal with somehow.
In a world in which 69% of all global fibre production is made from synthetic oil-based materials which will remain in landfill for generations to come. So why do we undervalue wool? It's natural, biodegradable and renewable, one of nature's best performing and most ecological fibres. Wool is currently 1% of the global fibre market. There are estimated to be 1.229 billion sheep on planet Earth, providing 1,937 million kilograms of wool per year, which is manufactured into a wealth of different products. And why do we overlook this extraordinary fibre, one which grows and renews on the backs of sheep, inhabiting the uplands and moorlands of Britain, the outback of Australia, the mountains and plains of New Zealand and the veldt and copy grasslands of South Africa? It seems we've almost forgotten the importance of wool, and many are currently blind to its unique properties.
It really is of the greatest importance that we educate and inform the next generation of makers and consumers of the global benefits of using natural and sustainable resources, including wool, which, as a longevity fibre, is then followed by its natural return to the soil.
For me, it was the strangest thing that you could buy your plastic t-shirt and then you had your merino clothing, which was the top layer. But when you cut yourself, it was only plastic and I couldn't figure it out. So I spent the journey deciding why on earth are we not using merino wool, a fibre that literally grows in the mountains behind me. We designed Wool-Aid, which is the world's first merino wool adhesive bandage. So once you're finished with your Wool-Aid, you peel it off, you bury it in the ground, and it will release nitrogen, phosphorus, all of these wonderful fertilizers for your vegetable garden and back for the soil.
The biggest challenge of our time is most certainly the climate crisis. It's in fact the biggest challenge in recorded history. I'm Jeff Ross. Myself and my family are the owners of Lake Hawea Station. We're 6,500 hectares and we run close to 10,000 fine wool merino and around 200 Angus cattle. farming today, you need a massive broad skill set. We've always in farming had to be mechanics, stockmen, vets, accountants, agronomists. But now more than ever, you actually also have to be an environmentalist. We knew we wanted to improve the environmental credentials here, and we wanted to be part of, some way in healing the planet, but we didn't quite know how. My son quite early on started talking about carbon, and sure, I understood that the world needs to lower its carbon footprint. The world is going to need to decarbonise, but I didn't really know how we could have a role in that here on the station. We emit 2,500 tonnes of greenhouse gas every year from this property, which sounds like a big number. But then we did a lot of work on our sequestration through our vegetation, revegetation, through trees that we're planting. We planted over 15,000. We came up with our sequestration number, and we're sequestering well over 5,000 tonnes. So that makes us carbon positive. Farming is viewed as somewhat of a problem in the climate crisis right now. I think a common myth in farming is that farming is at the expense of the environment. We came here with a real interest in improving environmental values, and so that's allowed us to open source and share this information and get an exchange going with a whole lot of farmers, because farming and the environment can actually be built constructively together. We're a farm that's actually helping to suck carbon out of the atmosphere.
There's a lot of discussion about how we sequester carbon in soil, and that's all about vegetation taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and putting it into the soil as organic matter. And if the soil is undisturbed, that organic matter can stay in the soil for long periods of time, preventing it from going back into the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas. In regenerative agriculture, there's discussion about the potential to use livestock as a way to manage the vegetation. So in a rotation over several years, you can imagine a field that some years will be left in grass, and think of that grass during the peak of the growing season. Livestock, cattle or sheep moving through that field, just eating small amounts of that vegetation, but not eating it to the ground, not leaving bare earth, but moving them on relatively quickly so that you're always keeping that vegetation just about at its peak growing capacity. That means it's photosynthesizing and building biomass as fast as it can, and at the same time, it's at that peak growth rate that's pushing carbon into the soil.
Grootebos is home to about 1,000 dual-purpose merino sheep, and they very much help to maintain the biodiversity of this farm as they graze dry land, and especially the stubborn land after the harvest. As they graze that land, they put nutrients back into the soil and increase the biodiversity of the farm. Farmers from the Cape to Cairo depend on sheep for their livelihoods, and it's estimated that 300 million of the poorest families depend on the livestock and small ruminant industry for their daily income. These animals have adapted to survive very arid and dry conditions, which make them suitable for Africa. And it's really a very important part of the income of the people living here.
I think wool is such a wonderful, versatile, sustainable and clean green fibre. I see that we're custodians of this property. We want to see our native flora and fauna thrive, and I think for the whole biodiversity of this property it's important to look after that native land. So we want to leave this property in even better order for the next generation.
So in all of our farming systems we've done a huge amount to help the environment. Over the last couple of decades we've planted 25,000 trees, put in miles of hedges, and all the time thinking about this regenerative, sustainable agriculture where one enterprise on the farm is helping and feeding another. We're farming some 4,500 acres here in Gloucestershire, and we do it all 100% organically. So what we've got is a regenerative agriculture type system. We're hearing a huge amount about modern farming practices and the emissions of methane into the atmosphere, which is of course damaging our planet. What we need to think about is how our meat is reared. The big difference between us as humans and sheep and cattle is that we're monogastrics. We have one digestive system, one stomach. Cattle, sheep, any animal that chews cud is a ruminant. It has 4 stomachs, and it, through evolution, learned to walk around the face of the planet eating vegetation. If we breed animals that require huge amounts of protein to be fed to them to be able to perform and produce vast amounts of meat, then of course that's going to add to the noxious gases that it's producing, putting it out into the atmosphere. If you breed an animal that performs well from the grass under its feet, and it converts that energy beautifully and slowly into fine quality meat, the emissions produced are far, far less. And the sequestering of carbon in the turf that they're standing on means that you can get to a carbon neutral point.
Sheep, being ruminants, produce more methane than non-ruminant animals. And this is because of the microorganisms in their foregut, the rumen and reticulum. These microorganisms are what enable sheep to survive on marginal land and high fibre, low quality feeds. These microorganisms enable them to digest and utilize the fibre within plants. And a byproduct of this fermentation process is methane. And there's no getting away from the fact that ruminants produce methane. However, what we can do to address this issue with methane and its contribution to global warming is to improve the production efficiency of animals, because if the sheep we produce are more efficient, then methane intensity decreases. In other words, we get less methane per unit of product produced. And there are many things that can be done to reduce methane intensity, most of which relate to the way in which we manage our animals. My name is Dr. Henry Greathead. I'm a lecturer in the School of Biology, part of the Faculty of Biological Sciences here at the University of Leeds. I'm a ruminant nutritionist. Management can go a long way to helping reduce methane emissions. Most of this is achieved through nutrition. So the more fibrous the diet, the more methane that is generated. So by pasture improvement, we get a reduction in methane emissions. And likewise, there are numerous products being explored through research and are currently available on the market that can be added to the diets of ruminant animals, sheep being one of them, which can shift the fermentation pathways within the animal, as well as inhibiting enzymes associated with the production of methane, which contribute to reducing methane. There will always be some methane produced, but we are not relying on fossil fuels in the production of wool or meat from the sheep. Thus, its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is fairly minimal.
This is a huge industry with global demand for natural and man-made textile fibres set to expand by 84% between 2010 and 2030. And according to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, textiles production is responsible for something like 1.2 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually. That's more than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. It is abundantly clear to me that we need to make changes to the way we think about the production, use and the disposal of clothing and textiles if we are going to get anywhere near to meeting the United Nations climate change goals set for the industry. And a major part of that change has to be moving from a linear system to a circular one.
Wool matters for me when it is grown organically and the animal welfare is a priority. And as a designer, it makes incredibly beautiful garments that can end up in your forever wardrobe and stand the test of time. At Mother of Pearl, we have worked super hard on our supply chains and from start to finish, and now we're moving into the world of circularity. We have launched rental and resale, and we're going to be working super hard on the resale and repair elements in the future.
Is there anywhere more bleak, more noxious or more eerie than a landfill site? This is where the detritus of our civilization ends up. Millions of tons of it every year. After a while, they become disguised, hidden from sight, giant dustbins in the earth with a covering of soil, but underneath, it's all still there. The synthetic shirts, skirts, hoodies and jumpers, the plastic raincoats and polypropylene carpets. No one knows how long they will linger in landfill, perhaps hundreds, maybe even thousands of years.
With His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales as its patron, the Campaign for Wool looks at the environmental impact of what we wear and what happens when clothes go into landfill. To prove that wool biodegrades and plastic doesn't, he simply buried 2 jumpers. I'm back here 4 months later to dig them up and see what's happened. Does wool really return to nature that quickly?
I think we found treasure.
So here's the woolly one. You can see it's just returning to the earth, decomposing naturally. That'll feed the roses. But this one, it's going nowhere. No, it's a plastic bag, and that's quite scary.
Plastics and synthetic fibres need industrial processing to recycle them, and they end up in our landfill site without biodegrading. The microparticles that shed off our garments into our wash are clogging up our oceans and causing huge problems for our environment.
In this short film, we've taken a look at some of the steps being taken by farmers and manufacturers to confirm wool as a 21st century biodegradable, carbon neutral and natural fibre.
In the grand scheme of things, especially considering sheep are largely produced extensively off grassland, which is sequestering carbon, this methane produced is part of a cycle, a natural cycle.
If we take care of soil, it helps take greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere and helps us to prevent the damage from climate change.
No one is exempt from acting to climate change, not countries, not companies, not individuals. Farming is not the problem in the climate crisis. Farming is actually a solution to the climate crisis.
Only wool provides the ultimate reassurance of sustainability.